The 1970s gave us disco, soft rock, and singer-songwriters who meant every word, but underneath all of that, something darker was being quietly pressed onto vinyl. Songs that made people pull over their cars, that radio stations refused to broadcast, that even the musicians who recorded them admitted they weren't entirely sure where the ideas came from. Here are the top 15 creepiest songs from the 1970s. Radio warns you not to listen. Number 15, War Pigs by Black Sabbath, 1970.
Generals gathered in their masses.
Black Sabbath opened the decade the way a door opens in a horror film. Slowly, heavily, with the feeling that something terrible is already on the other side. War Pigs was the opening track on Paranoid, released in September 1970, and it arrived with an air raid siren that sounded less like a musical choice and more like a genuine civil defense alert cutting through an ordinary afternoon. Tony Iommi's guitar riff moves with the weight of something that has been patiently waiting underground. Geezer Butler wrote the lyrics out of genuine anger at the Vietnam War, drawing a direct parallel between politicians and sorcerers who sacrifice young men for their own ends.
Now in darkness, world stops turning.
For a generation either coming back from Vietnam or watching friends come back changed, that comparison felt uncomfortably accurate rather than metaphorical. The song's original working title was Walpurgis, named after the witches' Sabbath celebrated on the night of April 30th. The record label pressed for a change, the band agreed, but the darkness stayed in the music regardless of what it was called.
And as God has struck the hour.
What makes War Pigs genuinely unsettling decades later is that the imagery of its lyrics never really went out of fashion, which, depending on your perspective, says something about the song, or about the world, or possibly both simultaneously. Number 14, DOA by Blood Rock, 1971. Blood Rock was a Texas hard rock band that nobody expected to score a top 40 hit. They managed it with one of the most genuinely disturbing songs ever played on AM radio. A first-person account of a man lying in the wreckage of a plane crash while a paramedic works beside him.
And when I look, I see there's nothing there.
The song runs 8.5 minutes. The narrator describes looking at his arm and finding nothing there. He sees the person beside him, her face covered in blood. He cannot move. He feels something warm leaving his body. By the end, the narrator has stopped trying to understand and simply asks God to teach him how to die. The recording closes with sirens, real American ambulance sirens. Keyboardist Steve Hill said in a 2010 interview that those sirens were a central reason radio stations struggled with the track. People driving would hear the sound and pull over to let an ambulance pass.
Something warm is flowing down my feet.
There was no ambulance. It was a record. The FCC banned DOA. Many stations refused to air it at all. Blood Rock never had another hit even close to it, and most people who heard the song once found they did not need to hear it again. Number 13, Black Sabbath by Black Sabbath, 1970. Where War Pigs is about the horror of political evil, Black Sabbath the song, the opening track on the band's debut self-titled album, also released in 1970, operates in a more personal and ancient register of dread. It begins with rain and a distant church bell. The main riff is built around a tritone, a dissonant musical interval that the Catholic Church labeled diabolus in musica during the medieval period. Whether that historical designation is precisely accurate is debated by musicologists, but Tony Iommi knew the interval's reputation and used it deliberately. Geezer Butler has said the song grew directly from a terrifying personal experience. He had been deeply immersed in occult texts, had painted his apartment walls black and covered them with inverted crosses and photographs of Aleister Crowley. One morning he woke and saw a dark figure at the foot of his bed. He reached for the book on his nightstand, and when he looked up, the figure was gone. He threw away all the occult material and never returned to it. Black Sabbath. The song came out of him immediately afterward. Ozzy Osbourne's vocal performance carries something difficult to describe precisely. Not someone performing fright, but someone who is genuinely frightened. That difference is audible, and it is why the track still works exactly as intended more than 50 years after it was recorded. The song opens the album that essentially invented heavy metal as a genre. That it also happens to be one of the most unsettling recordings in rock history is either a coincidence or the whole point, and the band has never needed to clarify which. Number 12, The Ballad of Dwight Fry by Alice Cooper, 1971. The Killer album of 1971 contained songs that treated death and madness not as dramatic metaphors, but as conditions described from the inside, and The Ballad of Dwight Fry is the starkest of them. The song opens with a child asking when her father is coming home, and her mother telling her he is sleeping. Then the father's voice begins. He is not sleeping. He is in a psychiatric institution, and the song traces his deterioration, or possibly his dawning clarity, from the inside. Midway through, the vocal breaks into something that sounds less like rock performance and more like a genuine cry for help, dropping the theatrical frame completely. Dwight Fry, spelled slightly differently from the song's title, was a real actor, best known for playing Renfield in the 1931 Dracula and Fritz in Frankenstein that same year. He was a classically trained stage actor who became irreversibly typecast in horror roles and struggled to escape them until his death in 1943 at the age of 44.
I gotta get out of here! I gotta get out of here! I gotta get out of here!
Alice Cooper used his name and story as a frame for a song about the trap of being permanently defined by darkness, a subject Cooper understood personally. The baby's wail near the end of the recording is real. It does not belong in a rock record. That is precisely why it is there.
I've gone insane!
Number 11, I Love the Dead by Alice Cooper, 1973. The Ballad of Dwight Fry was Alice Cooper exploring madness with some theatrical distance still intact. I Love the Dead from the 1973 album Billion Dollar Babies removed that distance entirely. The song is a first-person monologue delivered with an unsettling directness. No winking at the audience, no acknowledgement that this is performance. Producer Bob Ezrin gave the song a gothic grandeur that amplifies rather than undercuts its horror. $9 Babies reached number 1 in both the United States and the United Kingdom in 1973. This was the album's closing track. The fact that one of the year's best-selling albums ended with this particular piece of music says something about what audiences were willing to accept when the packaging was right. Alice Cooper shrugged off the song's shock value in a 2014 Rolling Stone interview, noting with characteristic dryness that it was difficult to truly shock an audience anymore. In 1973, it was somewhat easier. Number 10, Welcome to My Nightmare by Alice Cooper, 1975.
'Cause life is just a dream here.
Alice Cooper's 1975 concept album. Welcome to My Nightmare was built around a character named Steven. described as either a child or an adult carrying a child's inner life, who moves through a series of increasingly dark dreams. The title track functions as a formal invitation. Its particular menace is that the listener is not being thrown into the nightmare. They are being welcomed into it, courteously, by someone who lives there.
You're welcome to my nightmare, yeah.
Produced by Bob Ezrin with full orchestral support, the track has a grandeur that a stripped-down arrangement would not have achieved. Vincent Price narrated portions of the album's companion television special, lending the project genuine horror film gravitas. Cooper has spoken about Stephen as representing the childhood fears that most adults carry quietly into adult life. The nightmare not as theatrical device, but as the internal landscape of someone who never entirely left a frightened child behind. That reading makes the song substantially more uncomfortable than its lavish production initially suggests.
Welcome to my nightmare.
Number 9, Tubular Bells by Mike Oldfield, 1973. Mike Oldfield was 20 years old when he recorded Tubular Bells in 1972. The album was released in 1973 as the first release on Richard Branson's newly formed Virgin Records label. An entirely instrumental work, one musician playing dozens of instruments and constructing something that builds from a simple repeating piano phrase into a structure that eventually fills every available space. It was a record that should not have existed in the commercial marketplace of 1973, and it sold millions of copies. Virgin Records built its early years and early fortunes almost entirely on the strength of this one album by this one young man. The opening piano figure became one of the most recognizable musical moments of the decade when director William Friedkin used it in the 1973 horror film The Exorcist. Friedkin had heard the record and incorporated it into the film's opening sequence and its closing. The music became so associated with possession and supernatural horror that it fundamentally changed the emotional meaning of Oldfield's composition for an entire generation of listeners. Oldfield has expressed complicated feelings about that association over the years. He created the music as adventurous, progressive composition, not as horror. But the Exorcist connection gave the opening piano theme a second life that pure musical reception could never have achieved. There are people who cannot hear those notes without something cold and specific moving through them. And there are people who were too frightened to see the film, but have lived with the music anyway, arriving at the same response from a different direction. Number 8, Don't Fear the Reaper by Blue Oyster Cult, 1976. Don't Fear the Reaper was released in 1976 on the album Agents of Fortune and reached number 12 on the Billboard Hot 100. Written by guitarist Donald Buck Dharma Roser, the song grew from his reflection on mortality, on the possibility that death, rather than being something to resist, might represent completion or reunion. Roser has said that he was thinking about mortality in a personal way at the time, considering what it would mean to die young, and the song emerged from that contemplation. The song was associated with a pattern of increased calls to crisis services following airplay on certain stations during the late 1970s. Some radio programmers quietly reduced its rotation or added cautionary remarks before broadcasting it. The track's association with self-harm was strong enough that it was used in the opening sequence of the 1994 television adaptation of Stephen King's The Stand, a story about a pandemic that kills most of humanity. In a pairing that felt almost too appropriate for comfort, Roser has consistently said the song is about love surviving death and he is correct that this reading is genuinely available in the words. What the song sounds like to someone in a particular state of mind, at 2 a.m. in a dark room, that is a separate question, and one that radio programmers in the late 1970s were quietly asking themselves. The song's elegiac, almost beautiful quality is precisely what makes it more rather than less unsettling. There is nothing aggressive about it, which is, in its own way, the problem. Number 7, Frankenstein by the Edgar Winter Group, 1973. Frankenstein is an instrumental, a fusion of rock, jazz, and synthesizer that Edgar Winter assembled by editing long jam sessions and splicing the tape. The band jokingly called it Frankenstein because it was built from parts, like the creature. The song reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in May 1973, making it one of the rare instrumental tracks to achieve that position in the rock era. What gives it its uncanny quality is the ARP synthesizer, a relatively new instrument at the time, whose full tonal range was still being discovered, and the way the arrangement builds without ever arriving anywhere comfortable. It moves with the confidence of something that knows where it is going, while the listener never quite does. The Frankenstein title, the synthesizer's inhuman tone, and the sheer technical ambition combined to create something that resisted easy genre categorization. Too strange for standard radio formats, too accessible for the progressive rock audience, and too memorable to dismiss. Number 6, Aladdin Sane by David Bowie, 1973. The title track of David Bowie's 1973 album Aladdin Sane is perhaps the most overtly disturbing thing he recorded during the most commercially successful period of his career. Where Ziggy Stardust had narrative coherence and Hunky Dory a melodic warmth, Aladdin Sane the song is built around a piano part by Mike Garson that sounds as though it is playing from a room that has been slightly displaced from ordinary physical reality. Garson, whose background included jazz and avant-garde improvisation, delivered a solo that Bowie described as exactly what he had been looking for, but had been unable to specify in advance. The solo moves through dissonance, jazz phrasing, atonality, and extended silence in a way that does not resolve and does not try to, a musical representation of a mind not quite functioning the way minds are supposed to function. The song's parenthetical date range in its title, 1913, 1938, and the year of recording, evokes the 2 world wars and the uneasy interval between them, mapping Bowie's psychological fracture onto a historical trajectory of civilizational collapse. The combination of Garson's avant-garde piano and that historical frame makes the track genuinely disorienting in a way that a more straightforwardly creepy song is not. Number 5, Psycho Killer by Talking Heads, 1977.
Can't seem to face up to the facts.
Psycho Killer appeared on the Talking Heads' debut album, Talking Heads, 77, released in September 1977. David Byrne has said the song was inspired partly by Alice Cooper and partly by his imagination of how a homicidal narrator might present himself if given the opportunity to speak directly to the listener. Byrne has also noted that he wanted the character to be articulate and intelligent, someone who would be perfectly unremarkable in a social setting until the moment he wasn't. The song is written in first person, in a voice that is calm, articulate, and socially composed, until the chorus, where the narrator begins thinking in French.
Psycho killer, qu'est-ce que c'est?
The decision to have the character slip into another language at the moments of highest intensity was deliberate. It implies a fracture between the public-facing self and whatever is actually happening inside. Tina Weymouth's bass line gives the song a pulse that is simultaneously danceable and menacing, a combination that would become one of the Talking Heads' signatures, but which was genuinely novel in 1977. The track was widely played on new wave radio stations and became one of the band's most recognizable songs, which meant that a significant portion of the audience was cheerfully singing along to a first-person account of a murderer without necessarily pausing to consider that too carefully. The song's greatest trick is that it never sounds threatening on first listen. The menace only arrives when you stop moving and actually pay attention to who is speaking. Number 4, Night of the Living Dead by The Misfits, 1979. The Misfits formed in Lodi, New Jersey in 1977, and by 1979, they had built a sound and aesthetic constructed entirely around horror film imagery, early rock and roll structure, and Glenn Danzig's vocal approach, which treated horror not as camp, but as a legitimate emotional register for rock music. The band operated on the fringes of the New York punk scene, but were never quite of it, because what they were doing came from a different impulse than either pure punk aggression or the art school detachment of new wave. Night of the Living Dead appeared on the 1979 single that announced what the Misfits intended to do with their career. The song is short, punishing, and built around George Romero's 1968 film of the same name. A work that had lodged itself in the cultural memory of anyone who had sat in a drive-in movie theater in the late 1960s or early 1970s and been genuinely frightened. Romero's film was not a fun horror movie in the way that the Universal monster pictures of the 1930s and 1940s had been. It was grim, relentless, and carried a bleak social subtext that made its horror feel earned rather than theatrical. What the Misfits understood, and what made them different from other bands working in horror-adjacent territory, was that those films had reached their original audiences at a formative age and left marks that popular music had largely ignored. The Misfits picked up those images and put them directly into songs without ironic distance, treating the source material with the same seriousness that the original filmmakers had brought to it. Number 3, Hamburger Lady by Throbbing Gristle, 1978. Throbbing Gristle formed in Hull, England in 1975, and spent the following years developing what they called industrial music, a term they coined themselves, using sound as a tool for confronting what polite culture prefers to set aside. Hamburger Lady appeared on their 1978 album, DOA, the third and final report of Throbbing Gristle. The lyrics were drawn directly from a letter by artist and Vietnam veteran blaster Al Ackerman, who worked in a burn unit and described caring for a woman who had suffered catastrophic burns across most of her body. The letter is not metaphorical. It describes, with the matter-of-fact directness of someone who has processed the worst of something, what third-degree burns across the majority of a human body actually look like. Genesis P. Orridge and the group set those words to warping synthesizers, guitar feedback, and processed noise that creates a physical sensation of wrongness, rather than a musical experience in any conventional sense. The track runs approximately 5 minutes and does not resolve. The discomfort simply stops. It is not a song anyone listens to for pleasure. It is a document of something that happened, rendered in a form that refuses to allow emotional distance. Number 2, Stephen by Alice Cooper, 1975.
I don't want to see you go.
The Welcome to My Nightmare album contained multiple tracks that deserve individual attention, and Stephen is consistently cited as the eeriest. Where the title track is a formal invitation into darkness, Stephen takes the listener into a more interior and thoroughly disoriented space. The song is structured as a dialogue, though it is never made clear between which parties the conversation is taking place. Stephen is either talking to someone real, to himself, or to something that has no business being in the room. The vocal performance shifts between registers in a way that implies at least 2 distinct psychological states occupying the same voice simultaneously. Bob Ezrin's production uses silence with unusual effectiveness. The gaps between sounds carry as much weight as the sounds themselves. Vincent Price's narration elsewhere on the album provides external horror film framing, but Stephen builds its own disorientation entirely from within. No external frame is required or offered. Number 1, Frankie Teardrop by Suicide, 1977.
20-year-old Frankie.
Suicide were Alan Vega and Martin Rev, a duo from New York City who had been performing since the early 1970s and released their self-titled debut album in 1977. Their approach dispensed with conventional rock instruments entirely. Rev operated synthesizers and a drum machine while Vega sang. Their live performances were notoriously confrontational. Audiences would throw things, fight among themselves, or simply leave. The duo continued performing regardless. They were not trying to make friends.
Frankie.
Frankie Teardrop runs 10 minutes. It describes, from the inside, the mental collapse of a 20-year-old factory worker named Frankie who cannot support his family on what he earns and cannot find any way forward. The song documents what happens when he reaches the end of that road. Martin Rev's synthesizer backdrop has been described by critics as sounding like the murmur of a home appliance you can hear from another room at 3 a.m, not threatening, but deeply wrong. The sound of ordinary life operating in a context where it has no business operating. Vega's screams during the track were shocking in 1977 and have not faded in the decades since. They do not sound theatrical or performed. They sound involuntary, as though something is being forced out of a person against their will.
Frankie's getting evicted.
Author Nick Hornby described Frankie Teardrop as a song you only want to hear once. Bruce Springsteen cited it as a significant influence on his 1982 album Nebraska, which explored similar territory: American economic despair, men broken by systems larger than any individual, through an acoustic, stripped-down approach that reached a far larger audience. Springsteen heard what Vega and Rev were doing and understood it immediately. The song has never found a place on any regular radio playlist. It does not fit any format. It simply exists as one of the most uncompromising documents of human suffering that popular music has ever produced. And it has sat at the top of virtually every serious list of creepy, disturbing, and genuinely unsettling music from this decade for close to 50 years. There is a reason for that. It is not a reason that makes it easier to listen to. The 1970s produced music that was willing to go to genuinely uncomfortable places. Not for shock alone, but because musicians of that decade were processing a world that had experienced Vietnam, political assassination, economic collapse, and the slow end of countercultural optimism. The darkness in these songs was not manufactured. It was a reflection of what was actually in the air. Some of these tracks were banned outright. Some were played once by a brave DJ and never repeated. Some are still heard today in films and television programs that need to make an audience feel something specific and difficult. And the producers reach for these particular songs because nothing made since has done the same job quite as well. The decade that brought us Don't Fear the Reaper and Tubular Bells and Frankie Teardrop was, on the surface, the decade of ABBA and the Bee Gees and Saturday Night Fever. The contrast is not ironic, it is the point. Every era generates darkness in proportion to its brightness, and the 1970s had both in abundance. The songs on this list are the shadow side of the decade, pressed onto the same vinyl as everything else, playing on the same turntables, available to anyone who put the needle down. If you grew up with any of these songs on the radio, you already know what they do. If you are discovering them for the first time, consider yourself warned and consider yourself fortunate to be discovering them in exactly this order. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to our channel so you never miss out on more fascinating stories.